Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am particularly very excited for this AMA with Lisa. Based on our previous chats, I know the community, you're all going to get so much out of this conversation. So thank you for being here. As always, if you can, write in the chat where you're based and your role, that would be awesome, because then Lisa can get some insight into who she's chatting with. And I'll go through some housekeeping, and then I'll pass it over to Lisa and ask some questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So for those of you who haven't joined us before, or I see a lot of familiar names, so good to see a lot of folks. And then others who haven't joined us before, this is a very kind of casual environment for you to ask incredible leaders like Lisa any of your burning questions around go-to-market that you might not have the chance to otherwise, and also hear how other companies have built any secret sauce or any good projects or initiatives around this concept that you can potentially implement at your own. And so quick introduction of Lisa before I pass it over to her. She is the Senior VP for Global Sales at Intercom, where she's responsible for core sales, partnerships, sales dev, and enablement. And she is focused on working closely with clients to create the best customer service experience. She has more than 20 years of experience in this world, which is awesome. And just most importantly, when I talked to Lisa a couple of times around this topic of shifting from PLG to PLS, she had very clear and unique insights into how this is done and the learnings on the journey. So I'm very excited to continue the conversation today. So Lisa, why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and what got you to Intercom?
Sure. Well, thanks, Alexa. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Yes. So let's think, like, going way back, I've always loved technology. So at a young age, I did internships at startups. And then in undergrad, I studied economics. So I actually ended up going into investment banking, focusing on tech companies. And then after business school, went to IBM, where I spent, I was always in sales as a seller for some of our largest accounts, and then as a leader on both the services side and the software side. And when I left IBM, I was managing a very large team, had huge scale, managing over $1 billion in annual sales. And then I went to SAP, where I was still on the sales side, but more focused on go-to-market strategy. And one of the projects I worked on there was actually helping SAP sell to startups. And so it all comes back around, and I got that bug again and decided to go over to DataStax, where I was the head of Americas on the sales side. And then about a year and a half ago, came over to Intercom. And as you mentioned, today I lead all of global sales, which is core sales, sales development, partnerships, and enablement. So it's been a great journey.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. Why don't we start out with the super interesting journey for Intercom to product-led sales and where you've been on this spectrum, or this kind of processes from going very PLG to very sales-led, and where you've figured out to land throughout that entire journey.
Great. Okay. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Intercom, we are an AI-first customer service platform. And we actually started back in 2011 and fully PLG. And then in 2014, we added a sales team. And at that time, we had both the self-serve and the sales customers led by our relationship managers. So there was some, connection at that time. But then in 2020, we started experimenting with different kind of separations. And we specifically pulled out the month-to-month accounts, and then had the sales team focus on the annual contracts. And we also, one of the kind of first start to PLS was around that time in 2020, where we started a customer growth team, which focused on transfers. So specifically trying to transfer month-to-month accounts over to annual contracts. But it was a very, very small team and really more focused on hand raisers. So then, from 2020 until about a year ago, the teams really veered away from each other than that one small team that had the connection. And so we started to notice, though, that there was a lot of growth in that transfer team. And that was the impetus to start to look at what should we do differently here? Could we double down? Could we kind of figure out a way to accelerate that growth and really bring the two teams more together? And we specifically then said, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna try this challenge to truly identify and expand the most promising self-serve customers over to sales. And this was when we truly kicked off, more of a focus on PLS. And our goal was to identify and just be more proactive in this identification, the right customers at the right time, give them, a perfectly crafted message and help them along their journey.
That sounds like very common to what a lot of people are focusing on today. And I know for you, it was a big company-wide effort in order to stand this up and actually make it happen. When you talk about it, it sounds you figured it out and it was easy and you just implemented a project. But why don't you tell us a little bit about, I believe it's called Project Go-to-Market Touch, and what was it? How did you do it? Who was involved? I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So we started by, and I'll kind of mention all the folks along the way, because we have an amazing research team that really helped us, throughout the whole process. But we started with having them really do a lot of detailed digging in on what were the motivations for these self-serve transfers over to annual contracts. So we identified the plays based on those. And then we pinpointed the signals, again, with, the help of research on how to produce a product qualified account. Mm-hmm. So a lot of those were what you would expect, right? Product usage, tenure, engagement, different signals that showed this intent to potentially expand. And then we tested and iterated with our sales reps on what would be the best actions and the best messages, what worked with customers. Mm-hmm. And then very importantly, we built this into our systems. And that was a big deal because we wanted to make sure it was automated. So we had a ton of help in this whole process. We specifically brought in a consulting firm, Go Nimbly, that helped us with both the strategy and the tech implementation of a lot of this, because we worked obviously with our business systems team, but they were slammed on so many other projects. So it really helped to have, external guidance and support on this. And then we measured, learned, and refined it along the way. But Go-to-Market Touch was the overall name of the program. And we specifically identified 3 PQA areas and then the signals that went along with that. So there 2 of them were around these self-serve month-to-month customers and signals to move them over to a sales-led contract. And then we expanded it along the way to potentially also include the already sales-led customers and potentially expanding them. So an example is, there's a high usage, but there's no automation. Mm-hmm. So what Go-to-Market Touch would do is send an automated update to a rep through Salesforce that popped up and said, you have a potential lead here. So what you should do, here's what's happening, very specific, usage has increased and this customer doesn't use automation. So we had the playbooks then in that easily the rep could link in. And obviously all the contacts there in Salesforce to reach out to the customer and have a very crafted message. We helped with that as well and told them exactly what to reach out and say. And we had great response from customers because, again, it was the right customer at the right time.
Something you mentioned was we started with the research team and talking to our users and our buyers, which I think is so important to remember that, sometimes when you're building your own sales motion, your go-to-market engine, you're thinking what's good for us, but flipping it the other way and saying, why did our users go on this journey themselves? And what value are they getting? And then building around that is such an important point that you made and called out that they're the ones, that's what really started this whole process.
Yeah, you're so true. And that's why it was so successful, because the customers were, again, we were reaching out to the right ones, mm-hmm. but we knew what we were reaching out on. Yep. It wasn't just a cold reach out in any way. It was, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, we see that you have increased your utilization in this manner and you're using the product in this way. We think we can really help by adding automation as an example. And I mean, again, the reaction was great because customers were like, wow, I didn't think about that. Yes, let's schedule a call. And the response rate was so much higher, no surprise, compared to just a cold reach out.
Something that I see with the community and the market and customers is they can get into analysis paralysis on what are the right signals, what is the right PQL, what's the right playbook, what's the right messaging. And it sounds like you all picked a few and then iterated over time. Am I getting that right? And how did you make sure that you didn't get into this motion of we need the perfect playbook or the perfect signal or the perfect messaging and just started shipping? Because that seems to be a blocker at most companies.
It's a great call out because we started our original list. You can imagine of potential use cases was a mile long and all the different things we could do. And it really helped that this was part of a very structured project, an overall program within the company. You mentioned, having, a lot of good support. I mean, we had unbelievable support at the executive level and all through the company, but having this program really helped us to crystallize what were the most important use cases. And we said we could only choose 3. So that's why we ended up with the 3 I mentioned, but we had a whole long list. And once we chose those 3, they were the top priority. And then we knew we could expand later. And so that was important to give ourselves the okay to just start with this one section, see how it goes. Again, test, iterate, and then expand it as we go forward. So that is our plan, to continue as we get better and better at this and add more use cases going forward.
It's very impressive. That's easier said than done, to remind yourself that, perfection is the enemy of good. Like getting something out there and testing faster is better than testing, waiting to test 100 use cases. It's starting with the 3. So I also think something very unique that we talked about was how on board your executive and leadership team was. And even something you mentioned was the finance team needed to be bought in to think about the split between self-serve and sales. And it wasn't just a siloed PLG, PLS sales org that was figuring this out. It was a company-wide initiative, which made you all successful. I'd love if you can speak more to why does finance need to be involved? Why does this matter for the executive team and why it had such an impact on your team and Intercom as a business?
Yes. And so at the time we started this, we were in the midst of a massive company transformation. So we had all these different initiatives, and go-to-market effectiveness was a major initiative. And we just knew, as I talked about earlier, that there was more we could work on and truly getting the go-to-market machine humming. And so that's how it all started, and why we had support from the very top layers down. And to your point on finance, as we looked at all the different areas within go to market, both on the self-serve and the sales side, finance was involved to make sure we were also looking at how are the metrics here, and in particular LTV to CAC. If we're like, are we focusing on the right customers, and where should we have more of a focus from the sales team, based on kind of the overall long-term value of that customer. And that, is hard at times, right? Because there's shifts, as you can imagine, with where, the focus is of the sales team. But we just did a lot of communication, both, at the all hands level and also individually with the sales team on the why and what it meant for each team and what it would lead to from an overall success perspective for the company. So we had to get that buy-in, and there's obviously a ton of change management you can imagine as you go along the process, but having the executives involved in every single layer made a very big difference.
I told you were going to get this question, and you did get this question in the chat. Now, how did you get buy-in from executives to do this?
Yes. So they, to their credit, they said, okay, we know we have to get better at the machine, but we don't know exactly how. So they were looking to both myself and our, head of growth to come up with those ideas. So I had an amazing partner in the head of growth and going on, like, really trying to determine how do we do this. And so that's why, because we had, as I mentioned in the beginning, kind of starts and stops on the PLS motion, we knew there was potential there. And so that's what we brought together. And I think that made it stronger, both from the self-serve and the sales side. This is what we think we can do together. And one key thing too was part of like having the go-to-market effectiveness broader initiative. We really started by mapping out the buyer journey and laying out what is the process that the buyer is taking, whether they come in through self-serve or sales, and how does that impact each step along the way. And that, as you can imagine, was very well received from the executive level, because it really clarified why we wanted to make the changes and which aspects that we could impact.
It's such a good point. And I do think Intercom is unique in which you had, for this to work, you need it coming top down. The mandate of kind of go-to-market effectiveness or moving from PLG to enterprise, whether that's a sub-bullet or the entire initiative. And I think what's very powerful and why it worked for you all is you had this top-down initiative and your teams worked so well together. It's really hard to find organizations where growth can work with sales, can work with the RevOps, and you're kind of speaking the same language. And that's something I've noticed about kind of working with you all and learning more about your team and your company. It's very impressive. And going along with that, you said to me something. I remember I asked you about the split between self-serve and sales. And you said to me kind of shockingly, like, yeah, like we have some leads that get taken away from sales. And I'm okay with that, which 99.9999% of sales leaders would not be okay with that. So talk to me about kind of what is the split between self-serve and sales? Like, how did this go over with your team? Like, what does this look like?
Yes. And that's always as I mentioned, a hard message, right? To say to sellers, we are going to take away certain, leads or customers that you will manage. But, this goes back to when finance was involved and really looking at what made sense, right? And even a sales team is an investment, right? So you have to make sure that investment makes sense. And we were spending way too much time on the really, really small deals. And honestly, those customers wanted to self-serve. But the way we had split a few years ago, we were pushing many of them to sales. And so they were unhappy. And the sellers were fine, but it was such a small deal, it didn't make sense. So in the smallest of deals, we did, move those over to self-serve. And that's really through when a lead comes in, having the SDR, talk to that potential customer and kind of figure out and guide them through the self-serve journey, and making sure that we have all of that laid out very, very cleanly, which the growth team did a great job on. But that part was hard, right? But what we did on the other side, of course, was all about the messaging, right? Making sure you clearly outline for the sellers why we're doing this. And so we invested also in them. We invested in skills development and rolling out overall value-based methodology, and said, we want to make sure that you are, selling more kind of on the more complex, more interesting deals. That's where you should be spending your time, not on these tiny deals where the customers already want to be self-serving. Let's let them self-serve. They should, and they'll come to us, or we'll get the trigger when the time is right, when you can work with them and then help them along the journey. But you just being transactional is not fun for you, and it's not something that's really going to be overall good for the company. So, I have to give credit to our sales team. They have been so resilient in the whole process, and I've been really thankful because they're open-minded and ready to go. They're like, okay, what's next? And so, huge thank you to the Intercom sales team for sure.
It is, once you say it like that, it's just like, my first reaction is, duh, makes so much sense. Like listening to what your customers want and making the experience better for sellers where they can make more money by being more strategic, which for most people is more fun. But it isn't intuitive to most companies. So, I mean, kudos to you and the team for being able to really talk about why this is the benefit and the future way of selling and why this is great for you, our buyers, and the business as a whole. So it is super, super unique and really the secret sauce. We have a lot of questions in the chat. So maybe I'll start with Kevin asked, how long did this motion take to be maybe profitable or for you to see the revenue goals that you had in mind? I know you talked about LTV to CAC. Is there a minimum ACV customer that you would want to move from the self-serve to the sales funnel as well?
Yeah, so we were actually surprised at how fast, how quickly we saw the benefit. And a lot of that was because there was just a backlog, as you can imagine, of like when we did all the planning and set the triggers in motion, there's a huge amount of potential customers that we could go after. So right when we set it live, it was so exciting. Mm-hmm. So there was just almost immediate positive, uptick, which was really, really helpful. And so that's, the first answer. We were like lucky at how quickly it took off. We're constantly, again, adjusting, adding more use cases, all of that. So we're constantly looking at what is that sweet spot too between self-serve and sales. So right now it's fairly small. It's around 5K, and we're just looking what makes the most sense. So we have a huge number of self-serve customers though that just want to try it out. And they just want to have see if they like Intercom. And we want them to be able to do that. And then again, when when we see those, signals, then our sellers can come in and work with them and, potentially increase the size of the overall deal and then success for the customer.
It does feel like moving product-led sales or the entire spectrum of just what your go-to-market, the split between the different segments, it's always ever evolving based on the market, your new product launches, kind of what the team composition looks like. It does feel like you need to have sellers who are willing to go with the flow, and maybe that ACV number changes over time, and it's really because it's for the best for you and your customers and the business. But it is always changing. Did I get that right?
You did. And as we improve the skills too of the sellers, that's changing, right? And so because they're improving and we're already increasing the ACV. And so we're looking at that as we also look at, where do we draw that line? But it's also really important that I mentioned, like if a client comes in and wants to self-serve, they can do that. So even if they're bigger, but it's really trying to figure out, does it make sense for a super small customer to work with sales? But what we have figured out is we really want to make sure there's always an option to, reach out and get help where needed. So we're looking at actually new roles where we can have, in particular, we're calling it a product specialist who, if there is a self-serve customer who might not want to talk to sales, but has a question as they're in a trial, right? And they want to, raise their hand and ask a question. We want to make sure they have the support where needed. So that's, again, another, PLS motion where it's giving support at the right time. And then, they will continue their journey likely in self-serve, but then come back when, hopefully at some point when they want to expand and, potentially do more with Intercom.
Yep. I love the role of product specialist, and I've seen it called sales assist or other teams where it's almost an intersection of sales and support and, helping customers get to value. And it's so unique and it's so powerful when built well and clearly defined kind of levels of success and ways to drive real value and revenue for the organization. I have one more question. I know we only have 2 minutes, and I told you before this, Lisa, I could have asked you for like 4 hours questions. We barely got even through our list. But my last question I would like to chat with you about is how important was figuring out this buyer's journey prior to implementing a tech stack, and what did that process look like?
Yes. So it ended up being one of the absolute key parts of not only this PLS journey, but also, as I mentioned, the go-to-market effectiveness initiative. And and the credit is all to our biz ops team who thought of this and put it together. And it's not easy, right? Because putting together the entire buyer's journey in one sheet of paper is tough. But we were able to outline, how the customer comes in, and at what stage, that it kind of adjusts within the journey. And so at each of those stages, we made sure we had metrics associated with that. And that made a big difference as well. So as they're learning, as they're moving down the funnel, right? What is happening? Who is touching them? And how can we improve? And again, the reason it was so important was because it broke down each of those aspects to allow us to dig in, have metrics that we could track, make sure we were, making improvement along the way, and that we could, and we're in different changes, make these adjustments to improve the overall journey. And we really had the customer in mind. So figuring out how we could make their journey better.
It's a great point, and it's something that's often forgotten when you're just selling and building and going. It can be hard to say, let's pause, let's think, let's really be strategic about this buyer's journey prior to building an entire system or process around it. Thank you. We're shockingly at time because that actually felt like 5 minutes, but that was so incredible. So many good lessons from you, Lisa, around team alignment, exec alignment, being very thoughtful around what is the split from self-serve to sales? What does the buyer's journey look like? What should this program look like prior to implementing it? And it's so clear just how special of an organization and team you've built, both from the sense that people are willing to go with the flow. They're really interested in learning kind of new different go-to-market strategies and up-leveling and moving from transactional to more strategic. So I feel very lucky to have had you here with our community. So thank you so, so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for the time, Alexa. It's so nice speaking with you. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. And for folks here, I know if you have any other questions, Sandy just posted, feel free to join our Slack community and we'll continue discussing these topics. And thank you so much, Lisa. This was wonderful.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.